But one thing, man, I love about God, and I just look back at my life in those seasons of backsliding and rebellion, and I just see like how merciful, how gracious, and how loving God was. Not only did God protect me mercifully, for a season, not allowing me to get flipped immediately and go back to prison. I think God would give me numerous situations, numerous wake up calls, like warning signs, like the police are behind me. I got a gun, I'm high or drunk, and I got drugs in the car, trafficking, armed trafficking, and the police are behind me with the lights on. You know what I mean? And my life is flashing before my eyes. Literally, just seconds go by and they just go around me to pull somebody else over. And some may say that's coincidence, but for me in that moment, I'm like, God, like I hear you. You know what I mean? And I feel like in those moments, God was on numerous occasions with many other situations as well, with like conflict in the street with certain people, or just a situation that was crazy I would never get myself into, but it's kind of like fell in my lap because I knew I was out of pocket. I was outside the will of God. And I always look back, to the Old Testament as we should, and we see Israel. Every time Israel was rebellious against the covenant with Yahweh, like what would Yahweh do? What would God do? He would rise up surrounding nations and he would have them oppress Israel, to take them captive, to destroy them in battle, to pillage them, or all these different situations in conflict, but for the purpose of what? Like Yahweh, God still loved his chosen people. He still honored his covenant, but God would chastise them. He would discipline them because through that chaos, through that conflict, through that punishment, God's just wrath through the nations, it would lead Israel to repentance, that they would remember their first love, that they would remember the covenant that they made with Yahweh. And God would use that conflict, that chaos, that chastisement to lead them to repentance. So I know God's done, I've experienced that time after time after time again in my life. I know that all too well in my life. So by this time now, I already experienced this several times before. I'm just overviewing maybe one of my like biggest backslides, coming home from prison, like my first bid. So I knew what was going on, man. But what I was getting at is like, yo, God's so gracious, God's so merciful, God's so loving that even like, yo, in my blatant rebellion, even in my like full fledged, like running from the call of God upon my life, like God was still reminding